Hello friends, hope everybody's doing well. Here's the picture I'm going to be working from today. From Southern California, just outside of Temecula. I believe Temecula is close to those mountains in the background, just off frame to the left. So we've got a nice field with some trees, some beautiful cast shadows. Early morning when I took this photo. I really like the sense of distance and scale that you get from this photo. There's so many different planes. You've got that grass in the foreground, then you've got that bush on the right side casting a shadow across. Then you've got those two trees in the middle, almost exactly in the middle of the frame, which are going to be the focus point. And then you've got several layers of, well, you've got behind those trees, you've got a layer of shrubbery, and then you can see a little bit of houses behind that on the right side of the painting, and then you've got several layers of mountains going back. Then you've got the sky. So it's a very deep scene, and these really are some of my favorite kinds of scenes to paint, ones that are very expansive and deep and give you a sense of bigness and expansiveness. So here's the value study for this painting. The purpose of the value study is, well, there's several purposes. The main one is to simplify the scene into three values. You've got your lights represented by the white of the paper. Then you've got your middle values, which form one big connected shape. Then within that middle value shape, you've got your darks. So the middle value shape is made up of that bush on the right hand side, the cast shadow from the bush going right up into that tree on the right, down into these bushes, more shadows up into these trees. These two trees are going to be connected into one shape, then back into the distant bushes and trees in the background, and then on over to that little bush poking out from the right. Not sure yet if I'm keeping that bush. I think I might actually remove that. That'll kind of give the composition a more arrow-like shape, kind of narrowing as it comes here and then expanding out. I think I might get rid of that bush and I might end that shadow there and forget about that part. These mountains are going to be tricky to get right because I really want to convey that sense of distance in the mountains. I'm going to be tempted to make them too dark, so I have to be mindful of that. It's a very simple scene as far as the different components. There's also some rocks in here that I forgot to put into the value study, so I'll just add those into the painting. One thing that's going to help me with these mountains is painting wet into wet. Normally I would let the paper almost completely dry after the first wash, but in this case I'm going to start painting the mountains while the paper is damp. So not completely dry, but also not soaking wet. I think that'll help convey that sense of distance by allowing the mountains in the background to fuzz and bloom a little bit. And painting wet into wet also helps keep the value of the paint itself to be lighter. It will dry quite a bit lighter the wetter it is. And then the sky is going to be pretty simple. It's just going to be some blue at the top. I do want to portray that cloudiness, that kind of light hazy cloud that we've got going, just kind of diagonally like that. That will further help emphasize that shape that I'm wanting to get from this big middle value shape, where everything kind of comes to a point here and expands out that way. If the clouds also kind of point down this way, I think that will help with that. So let me get situated here and we'll get started. So So we got our sponge ready. We're gonna get that wet. I've got my little Tupperware full of water and my rag off camera here. I've had to reorganize my space just a little bit. My space is very, very limited, so I have to be pretty creative with how I use it. And as always, there's a materials list in the description as to what I'm using. So I'm just getting my sponge wet. And what I'm going to be doing is evenly wetting both sides of the paper. Reason for wetting both sides of the paper is to keep it flat on my board without having to tape it down. But also, the paper stays wet for longer, which allows for more time for painting wet into wet and getting those nice fuzzy blooming shapes. And since I live in Arizona and the air is always dry, I need all the help I can get with keeping my paper wet without having to use a spray bottle if I can avoid it. I will do that sometimes if I need to though. I just have a little spray bottle I got from Amazon. So now I've squeezed the water out of the sponge and I'm gonna go back over the paper with it and kind of soak up just that layer of water that's sitting on the top. And I will do this on both sides. Again, keeping it as even as I can. The reason I'm trying to keep it an even dampness is to prevent crumpling. The paper will start to bow and buckle if one area is wetter than the other, because it will dry more quickly in one spot than in another spot, and that will cause the paper to form little ridges. So the sponge is really, really a game changer for keeping your paper flat, making it wet evenly, and then just allowing for a very smooth wash, which is what we're going to get into now. So the first wash, remember the white part of the value study. You can see the value study in the top of the screen there. I'm just going to keep it there for your reference, because that's what I'm going to be looking at while I'm painting is my value study, and then I've got my reference photo in front of me right next to it. I'm just going to drop in a very light cerulean blue for wherever that sky is showing through the clouds. It's going to be very light, very subtle, just straight cerulean blue. I don't think I'm going to add anything to it. Well, maybe I'll add some of this turquoise. Yeah, something like that. I use cerulean blue, and I believe this is cobalt turquoise. Let me check actually. I don't have the tube, I got rid of it, but I believe it's cobalt turquoise. I usually use some combination of these two for my skies. That looks about right, so I'll just... So kind of painting that shape of the cloud I was talking about before, how it angles this way, kind of slopes down. Usually I would paint my skies a bit darker than this, but in this case I want it to be light and just a little streak. I really like the shape of this cloud bank. Very subtle. Kind of got that Southern California haze in the air. And I'm probably gonna warm up the color of the clouds themselves. I don't want them to be pure white in this case. Sometimes I'll leave them pure white. I'll just grab some of this burnt sienna, which has got a nice rusty ruddy color to it. And there's still some of this blue in my brush, so it's dulling it down a little bit. This is very, very subtle. Just nice warm clouds. Painting right through the trees. These will be significantly darker once the second and third washes are done. Just something like that. Very simple. Yeah, that's the sky done. Easy as that. Sometimes simpler is better. Now I'm going to start painting these distant mountains, so let's get some blues mixed up. Something that helps in portraying distance is making things more blue the farther away they are. So I want these distant mountains. Cobalt blue is actually going to be good for this too. I'm going to mix this cobalt blue and ultramarine blue together, maybe more heavy on the cobalt blue. I want the mix to be a little thicker than the sky. Even though it's still the first wash, there's going to be some subtle variations of the thickness of the paint, even in the first wash. Just checking the bottom of the paper. It's still damp. I might have to re-wet it with my bottle. Yeah. Might end up going back over this later, but I'm not sure yet. And you'll notice at the top how the paint starts to fuzz and blend into the sky. Might darken up the top of the mountains just a little bit more. And then I might lift up some of the paint towards the bottom to give the idea of a little haze or mist. I was out here for one of my friend's weddings, and I decided to take a little detour to take some reference photos on my way home. Always looking for opportunities to take pictures and find good scenes, so I can try to lift up some of this paint like that, just with this damp brush that only has water on it, clean water. Might need a bigger brush for this actually. It's not lifting up enough. Yeah, there we go. So that's probably all I'm going to do. I want the effect to be fairly subtle. Just drop in some more blue for what's going to be showing from behind these trees. Some more blue at the base of these mountains. I'm going to drop in maybe some more warm color there for the sun hitting the face of these mountains. Some burnt umber. Nice warm brown color. adding some separation between these two ridges here. A lot of this will be covered up by the foreground stuff, but some of it is going to be showing through behind these trees, so you have to keep that in mind, what's going to be showing through when you lay down your second wash and your third wash. That's what this first wash is setting the painting up for everything that comes after. And I'm going to re-wet this before it's completely dry. Just give it a little more life. You might think that looks way too dark, what I just put down, but keep in mind, watercolor dries a lot lighter than when you put it down. So if it looks right immediately after you put the paint down, it's probably wrong. It's probably too light. It's something that new artists struggle with a lot, including myself when I first started, is being afraid to go dark. And so your painting ends up looking washed out when you're done. And that's always a disappointing experience. Yeah, so painting this peak that's closer to the foreground. The top of it is still fuzzy, giving you that sense of distance. And then there's like the shadow that comes across there. Just blending that right into this paint I just put down. Wet into wet. The combination of the fuzzy texture and the blue color helps push these things far back into the scene. Makes them look very far away. Painting is all about illusion. We are creating illusions. How do you portray a sense of a huge expansive scene where you can see for 15, 20 miles into the distance on a flat piece of paper and pigment? How do you do that? It's all illusions. Very beautiful illusions, but illusions nonetheless. So I'm mixing up some warm color for this dead grass in the foreground. It's just yellow ochre. I'll throw in some of that umber in there. Very light, very, very light. I painted right through those trees that are going to be kind of in the mid-ground, because they'll be significantly darker in the second wash. I do not believe I'm going to be leaving any area of pure white in this painting today. Maybe a few incidental highlights here and there, just for some sparkle. I really, really like this early morning warm light. It's just beautiful. So I'm going to be putting a lot of different warm colors underneath, especially as it moves towards the foreground, which would be the opposite of painting things in the background. Things warm up as they move closer to you. There's a lot of really beautiful variation in this dead grass. There's even some like purplish color I'm seeing in there. I try to drop some of that in now. This is like a violet color. I don't exactly remember what the specific color is. I've just had it on my palette forever. That's way too vibrant, so I'm gonna add some blue to it to purple it up a little bit, and then some umber to dull it down. Maybe some red in there too. Just all kinds of things going on. kind of a plum color. So I want that variety of color in the grass to show through. And then it transitions back to a dark, kind of, not dark, but a yellowy color as it comes forward. There's some streaks of that color here too in the background. Just really subtle, really, really subtle variations in the color. So clean off that brush, get rid of that purple color. This mop brush holds so much water. It has made my life so much unbelievably easier. Get yourself a mop brush. Do it. They're a little pricey, but it is worth the money. This one's it's just a Windsor and Newton. Got it at Blick's. This isn't even one of the really high quality expensive ones, but it's still absolutely amazing. It just makes it easy to paint these big, huge shapes effortlessly. You don't have to fuss with going back and forth and dipping into your water all the time and losing track of where you are. So see how I'm adding more warmth as I come forward, and I'm also darkening it up, thickening the mixture just a little bit, just to emphasize the fact that now we're close to you, to the viewer. That's really pretty. I like this a lot. First stage is always nice and relaxing because it's loose, it's expressive, it's kind of impressionistic. You're just letting every single thing on here flow together and blend and do what watercolor does best. Watercolor loves to mix itself on the page. See this little ridge forming here? You might not be able to see it on the camera. There's a way you can deal with that, which is by spraying the back out of the side of that ridge. And that should flatten it out a little more. It's not the end of the world, but I'm just OCD, I guess. It bothers me when it happens. All right. I'm looking at this and I'm seeing if I need to do anything else while everything is still very, very wet. And there's a few things I would like to do. I would like to try to lift up more paint somewhere, like here. Yeah, there we go. See, if it's too wet, it's hard to lift up paint, it seems like. But if it's too dry, it's also difficult. So it's got to be, you have to kind of have the right timing for lifting up paint. I also want to darken up this mountain just a little bit. This one here. Maybe more clearly define the top of it, the shape. It's basically that same blue color as before, just a thicker mixture. Now, these mountains are by no means the focus of this painting, but they do give the foreground a place to sit. They give you contrast and a sense of scale. Maybe darken these ones up on the right just a little too. Just a little bit. Yeah, I think that's gonna be good. So I need to let this dry and then we will continue. See you in a minute. All right, we're gonna start our second wash. Remember, the purpose of the second wash is to find that big connected shape, which, lucky for us, we've already done thanks to our value study. You can see exactly what the shape is. It's all planned out already. In a way, I've already painted this scene once, so I'm just painting it a second time with color. That's all I'm doing. I cannot emphasize enough times how much of a game changer value studies have been. They've completely changed the way I paint. They've made me a much better artist. So, I've got this nice kind of earthy green color mixed up, just with some yellow ochre and cobalt blue and a little bit of this ultramarine blue as well. I'm gonna mix up a little more just so I can have some on my palette. Just a big old puddle so I can just keep going as long as I can. And the color is not going to be exactly the same, but you don't want it to be with green. You want variations in your greens. That's what makes it look natural. Adding some water to this so it flows a little easier. There we go. So, I'll just start right here. It is still a little damp, but that's good. That's what I want. I want just a little fuzziness in this scene. Kind of a soft, I want the scene to be a little softer than what I usually paint. Kind of convey that peaceful early morning atmosphere. I'm really not a morning person, by the way. I just happened to be driving home early in the morning. I wish I was a morning person because it's a beautiful time of day. Maybe one of these days I'll figure out how to be a morning person. You may have also noticed that in my sketch that I had, I spent a lot more time drawing the shape of the trees than I usually do. I usually just kind of put a splotch there, but I really wanted to make sure that I got the shape of the trees right because I love how they look. I think they just have so much character and personality. If I'm not mistaken, these are eucalyptus trees of some sort. All over Southern California, you've got these eucalyptus trees. It's very ubiquitous for the area. We got them too in Phoenix. All imported, I think, from Australia. Throwing some red in here because there's a little patch of more red plants. What I was saying about variation. It's not just a mass of green, there's reds, there's blues, there's yellows, there's purples, all kinds of colors going on. You really learn how to see more colors in the world as an artist. I had no idea there were so many colors in things. I really just didn't know until I started painting. So these little splotches here are just kind of indicating very far distant stuff, like that town in the background. Don't remember what this town is. It's not Murrieta. It might be Hammett. I'm not sure. letting things just bloom out. Bloom and fuzz, bloom and fuzz. Watercolor has a reputation for being difficult to control, and it 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 is in a way because of what I was just talking about with the blooming and the fuzzing. It wants to flow because it's water. It doesn't just stick to your to the paper like a oil paint would stick to a canvas. Oil paint doesn't move once you put it on paper. It stays right where it is, but watercolor, if you're not careful, it can get away from you. But by that same token, that's what makes it so beautiful, is its ability to flow and to kind of morph and do things that you can't really predict. So you have to learn, there's a balance between letting it flow and controlling it. You want it to have a little bit of chaos, a little bit of it doing its own thing. Take advantage of the medium and what it can do. Because there's definitely a style where you can, in watercolor, you can make things more rigid and precise, but this is a lot more suitable for my personality, painting this way, loose and expressive. Now I will be dropping in some of these darks while this middle value shape is still wet. Painting wet into wet in trees is another trick to making them look like trees. I'll show you what I mean shortly. So I'm just looking back and forth between my value study and my reference photo, leaving little gaps in the tree canopy. I'm not just painting it one big massive solid shape, especially towards the edges. I'm kind of making these little marks, these little tiny brush marks just to indicate leaves. Following that shape that I drew with my pencil. I did let the mountainous area dry before I painted the trees over top of it because I wanted that area of tree to be very sharp, but I wanted the bottom to be a little more fuzzy. I wanted kind of both those sharp edges and those soft edges happening. And I'm splattering all over the place today. Connecting these two trees into one big shape. And we'll connect that right into this background foliage. I'm physically touching the paint into that other shape. I'm letting it physically blend together. Yeah, remember how I said I was going to get rid of that bush on the left here? I almost started painting it. I'm glad I remembered. Not going to paint it. think the scene would be better without it. See, that's why you don't want to just copy your reference photo. You want to make it a painting. You can change things, you can move things around, you can do whatever you want. That's why it's a reference photo. It's just for reference. The rest is up to you. Creating your own world, as Bob Ross would say. Your world can be whatever you want it to be. Just defining the edge of this bush a little more. I think it might have been a little too fuzzy. So just adding more paint back in. Pretty good so far. I'm seeing. I was going to try to scratch out some grass here, but I think I waited too long. Yeah, it's too dry. Your paper has to be just the right dampness to get away with scratching. Like this is too wet. See, the paint just kind of fills in the hole. So it's got to be right in between dry and wet in order to scratch. Timing is everything. You've always got to be watching your edges and what's dry, what's still wet. So I'm adding in some of those darks into the background bushes because they're so far away. I don't want their shapes to be too defined and distracting, but I still want them to have some definition. So if I do that while things are still wet, things will be nice and fuzzy, indistinct. And I will be adding just more texture to all of this grassy area later on. Be a good opportunity to show you dry brushing. Something I use all of the time, dry brushing. Now, let's drop in some of these shadows. Cobalt blue, burnt umber, it's a little too green. Need to clear out some space on my tiny palette. I have a bigger palette, but I just don't have space to use it at the moment. And I'm honestly so used to using this small, this is essentially a travel palette, that it's not really a big issue for me at this point. I've kind of just learned to deal with it. So adding some of those darks into these bushes here, taking advantage of that wet into wet technique. I'll start darkening up this tree too. Now my light is coming from the right, so the shadows are going to be on the left side of these trees, and then the cast shadows are going to be moving left across the ground. Always be mindful of where your light is coming from. Having this, whoops. That's going to be a bird. Drop my brush on my painting. I was planning on putting birds in the sky anyway, so we'll just make that a bird now. There. We'll add dark into these trees too. Actually, I'm going to do this bush first. So I'm kind of jumping between middle value and dark right now. Usually I do it all, I do each wash separately, but sometimes it's good to add darks in while it's still wet if you want a more subtle, soft shadow, which today I do. I want more soft edges within this middle value shape, but there's also plenty of hard edges, like where the trees meet the sky. I like that contrast. And I will further darken some of this later on too once it's drier. So start to paint that shadow from this bush. I'll paint just a few of those blades of grass sticking up that are in shadow. Help give it some texture, some realism. Just adding some more shadows going across here, coming closer to the foreground. Now adding the darks to these trees. I can start hinting at some of these trunks too. So as I'm painting these trees, I'm constantly varying my brush stroke, just changing the direction, changing how big, how small. If you paint with the exact same brush stroke, the whole tree, it'll look stiff and unnatural. I'm trying to imitate the randomness that nature has with my brush. Again, just creating the illusion on 2D paper of a 3D world. Okay. Scratching out a few lighter branches here and there. Just a few. Now we can do some dry brushing. This ground needs texture. The bulk of the painting is actually done. Now it's just adding a little more texture and some finer details. It's another reason I love painting simpler scenes like this. Just quick and satisfying. I'm fuzzing out the top of this here. Just adding a little more, just some dry brush in the background just to give a tiny bit more detail. And I wanted to create a transition between the far background and the midground. So fuzzing the top of the tree line here is going to help with that, hopefully. Didn't want there to be such a sharp line between background and foreground. So I'm going to bust out this mop brush again. Another thing this brush is great for is textures. You can get a lot of texture in just one quick stroke. Kind of like this. And I'm really not darkening these areas up too much. I just need there to be a little more variation in the ground and in the grass and everything going on up here. Preserving some of those lighter areas still where I can. Using this red for this dead grass. This plum colored dead grass. It's like plum brown. Who knew dead grass could be so pretty? Painting has helped me see beauty in places I would never have even noticed previously, like a field with trees in it. I've always had an eye for beauty, but painting has really taken that to another level. Yeah, so I'm just adding some really nice subtle variation in this field. So do some dry brushing where my brush is relatively, it's not soaked with water, it's just damp, and then I take it and I kind of swipe it across the surface of the paper like this. Very easy way to get texture. And this will really, really, really help tie everything together. Kind of dulls down the foreground. It was a little too bright. Another thing I can do with this brush here, splay the edges out like that, and then hold it basically 90 degrees to the paper, and then paint like this. And you got grass, just like that. It's a very subtle effect, but your brain will pick up on the pattern. Your brain knows what grass looks like. I can kind of just disperse that here and there. Just indicate grass peeking up from beneath the scene, if you will, from under where you're looking, beyond the edge of the scene. Now that I've wet this again, I'm going to add some softer darks here and there. Just give even more texture to this ground. Maybe some very subtle areas of shadow within this grass. I'm not going to go too dark, although some shadows do need to be darkened up a bit, so yeah, okay. This bush needs to be darkened up more because it's the closest thing to the viewer that is in shadow. Another way to achieve that illusion of depth is darkening things up as they come to the foreground. Generally speaking, the closer things are to you, the higher contrast there will be. So the darkest darks and the lightest lights will be in the objects that are closest to you. So this shadow will be the darkest shadow of the painting. I'm going to darken up this area here too to pop out the top of that bush that's in sunlight. Need to add some darks into these mid-ground trees. Just further define the shape of these individual bushes back here. And these shadows need to be darkened a little too, here and there, just a little. Another way that this value study is very useful is I already know where I need to spend my time focusing on adding darks. So that way I'm not going crazy and just adding darks everywhere and killing all my lights, because I will absolutely do that if I don't have a plan. I'll just go insane. Can't help myself. So that's one way that you can make watercolor more manageable, is by having a very clear plan as to what you're going to do with a value study. So you can think of it as practicing for your painting. I actually resisted doing value studies for a really, really long time. I've only ever started using them recently, relatively speaking. I don't know, I just thought I didn't need them for some reason, but I definitely do need them. They just make so much difference. So these shadows going across are also helping create different layers in the scene, separation between different areas of the painting. trees need to be darker too. And this dark color is just a very dark, it's a dark blue, it's not black. This nice dark blue color makes the painting vibrant and lively, even in the dark areas. Beauty in darkness. Yeah, I was driving on the freeway and I looked over to my left, or actually it was to my right, and I saw this field and I immediately knew I had to go take a picture of it because the lighting was just so beautiful. It was just so beautiful. I have several more photos from that morning that I'm going to be painting soon, so stick around for that. They'll all have a very similar vibe to this one. Very simple, elegant, hopefully evocative, makes you feel something. At this point, I'm just kind of using whatever random colors are on my palette. I'm not really concerned about it at this point. I'll take a step back and look at this. There's some subtle shapes going on right here that I like in the grass. Kind of like that. And these are all leading your eyes to the main shape, that kind of motion. We can add the rest of our birds in the sky. Just a few little shapes here and there. That's how you turn an accident into part of the painting. Because accidents will happen. Maybe just Just a few more randomly. Yeah. Give the painting a little motion, a little life. Put one more over here too. Maybe some more down here. I guess I'm kind of ending up making it look like there's birds kind of flying up from ground and kind of scattering. Yeah, I like that. Scratch out a few branches here, a few there. It's crazy how much more realistic the trees look just after doing that. I'm gonna scratch out some grass blades, I think. Yeah, just a little bit. It's really subtle, but you should be able to see it. Well, I'm calling it good. It's a finished painting. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. I really hope I see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.